Effects of climate change. What are the effects of climate change? Well, they vary depending on where you live. For some people in developing countries, it means a lack of food and water resources because their land cannot support crops anymore. In other parts of the world, a changing climate might mean that natural disasters will become more frequent and destructive. The truth is that no one knows precisely what will happen to our planet over time because this has never happened before. But we do know how much damage has already been done due to global warming, and we need to stop it now. Effects of climate change on human health. Climate change and its effects on human health have been a topic of discussion for some time. Debates over the effect climate change has had throughout history and what will happen in the future is standard fodder among scientists worldwide. It is predicted that there can be an increase in heat-related deaths if measures against global warming aren't taken soon. Lack of food production due to drought may lead to famine or worsening malnutrition rates. Changing weather patterns could affect water supply, leading to population displacement from their homes because they cannot access clean water anymore, which would result into more disease outbreaks, especially with populations living without adequate sanitation. There are many other factors, such as flooding, landslides, crop failures, etc., which all play significant roles depending upon where you live. Effects of climate change on animals. The unpredictability of climate change is a significant concern for animal populations. One study has shown that some animals are shrinking in size. Others have been forced to migrate further north or south than they typically would due to changes in the temperatures, precipitation levels, and availability of food sources. With rising sea levels comes ocean acidification, making it harder for certain species such as coral reefs who depend on calcium carbonate dissolution from shells and other minerals dissolved into water, with elevated CO2 concentrations becoming too acidic. Climate change impacts marine life and terrestrial-based creatures like many mammals whose ranges will be restricted by temperature shifts upwards toward northern regions where there may not be enough habitat left over after humans take their share without developing new conservation strategies first. Effects of climate change on plants. No one knows how exactly the rise in global temperatures will affect plants, but it's a safe bet that they won't be good for them. Plants are sensitive to changes in their environment, especially sudden ones like rapid temperature change or increased rainfall. Some plant species may not be able to migrate fast enough as climate zones shift and new habitats open up where there were none before. Others might have too much water from an increase of precipitation for soils can absorb all at once, causing flooding, which kills off crops, while other already dry areas become even less livable due to lack of rainwater reserves. Still more could see extreme heat waves during periods when food is most needed. Such variations on traditional weather patterns create uncertainty about what life will look like over time. Effects of climate change on ecosystem. Climate change can significantly impact ecosystems, as it alters the plants and animals that inhabit the area. A significant way climate change affects an ecosystem is by altering its inhabitants. For example, when changes in temperatures make some animal species migrate to more hospitable areas or die off entirely. This then forces humans to adapt themselves accordingly if they wish to survive living there, such as planting different crops with less frost risk than before, so these fundamental changes don't hinder food production. Climate change has many effects on ecosystems, some of which are hard to predict. For example, the changing climate may be affecting the diversity and distribution of species in habitats across all regions around the world. As a result, we must remain vigilant for changes that disrupt our food supply or impact people's livelihoods due to loss of jobs from natural disasters such as floods and droughts caused by climate change conditions, including lack of rainfall. Effects of climate change on aquatic life. The effects of climate change on aquatic life are often overlooked because they do not get much attention. The consequences of climatic changes to the marine environment go unnoticed and unacknowledged, but that does not mean it is without value. Many animals in these environments will be affected by rising water levels, increased incidence or severity of storm surges, as well as ocean acidification, among other potential risks caused by our changing planet. The world's oceans are steadily becoming warmer year after year with no sign that they'll cool down anytime soon, meaning animals like penguins and sea turtles won't be able to swim away from heat waves anytime soon. Nowadays, many people depend on these animals economically or culturally because tourism has increased exponentially over the past few decades, mainly due in part to social media platforms such as Instagram and Snapchat, where we're exposed daily at all hours of our lives through filtered photos. Effects of climate change on agriculture. As the Earth's climate changes, so do our agricultural practices. In order to adapt and thrive in a hotter future, we must adopt new methods of farming that can withstand drought or flooding, which are both potential outcomes from increased global temperatures. The only way for agriculture as an industry to prepare is by educating farmers on how they should react when faced with these shifts and providing them with materials like seeds bred for heat endurance, irrigation equipment suited for various climates, including humidity sensitivity levels required at different times during growth cycles. This will ensure farms have access to water even if it becomes scarce later down the line. Effects of climate change. Effects of climate change on global warming. The most recent and conclusive evidence of the effects that climate change is having on global warming comes from a new study in Nature Climate Change, which found that, with every 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature above pre-industrial levels, an additional 2.2 million people will be at risk for coastal flooding due to sea level rise. This isn't all bad news though, as these areas also experience increased agricultural outputs and reduced energy demand. This can lead to improved economic conditions once those populations are relocated inland or away from vulnerable regions. Effects of climate change on economy. As the climate changes, so does our economy. Climate change is a growing risk to business and investment, according to an article on Bloomberg this week. The proportion of assets that are at some level of exposure has more than doubled in 2 years. A recent report from Control Risks notes how risks associated with extreme weather have grown over time. As natural disasters become stronger, they will likely also last longer. While these events can be devastating for many economies, there's been evidence suggesting it could both create new opportunities or shift economic priorities within countries too, such as Vietnam, which had its agricultural sector heavily impacted by floods yet managed to grow economically due to rising labor costs elsewhere in Southeast Asia. Bloomberg. Effects of climate change on ozone layer. Scientists have warned of the consequences that climate change may cause to our ozone layer. The increasing heat from greenhouse gases can lead to more frequent and damaging natural events like storms, hurricanes, wildfires, etc., which will, in turn, deplete the protective atmospheric component called ozone. Scientists are worried about how these changes might affect us all, not just because this could be bad for humanity's health but also because it would make Earth less habitable than it is now. In the past, scientists thought that climate change would only affect the Earth's temperature. However, more and more studies show how it is also affecting our ozone layer by reducing its thickness, which in turn affects the Earth's surface temperatures. This issue will not be solved until we take care of both global warming and pollution at once for a better future to come. Effects of climate change on acid rain. The most prevalent hypothesis is the acid rain theory, which suggests that as temperature increases, so does precipitation. This means more acidic water in the atmosphere and on Earth. Acidic rains create a vicious cycle of problems for animal life because they become inhospitable to animals who have not evolved an immunity or defense against them, such as insects, amphibians, and fish species like salmon. The vegetation also becomes less nutritious due to lower levels of nitrogen caused by these acids, weakening plant defenses from being exposed directly to it during rainfall events where plants are soaking wet with high concentrations surrounding their leaves when disturbed by wind gusts or flooding while standing still at ground level within shallow water bodies near shorelines occasionally. Receiving direct contact with salty seawater spray creating salt-tolerant weeds. Effects of climate change on non-living things. It's almost as if you'll hear many talks about the implications, like changes to plant and animal life, but not that much information on how it will impact non-living things, like buildings. The reality, though, is those impacts are just as significant, if not more so. For example, storms or floods could wash out bridges. In addition, vehicles may have trouble with ice due to freezing rain in areas where they were never before seen, such as North Dakota.